Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah here. We're holding Mishnah Berurah Chelik Beis, and in Mitzvah Hashem today we will complete Daf Samach Amid Aleph, and let's see how far we can get on Daf Samach Amid Beis. We are continuing to learn Hilchas Netillas Yadayim. We pick up today on Daf Samach Amid Aleph, second line down in, no, not quite. We did not quite finish Siman Kuf Samach Gimel Sif Aleph. We have a Mishnah Berurah that we have to do, and we have to do the final phrase of Sif Aleph, which are the words of the Ramah. So let's just give a quick recap into what we have seen so far in Siman Kuf Samach Gimel. So the Mechaber opened up Siman Kuf Samach Gimel, discussing the case of somebody who's traveling, and he doesn't have any water available for the Netillas Yadayim. What did we see in the Mechaber? The Mechaber said, you're traveling. You want to eat your salami sandwich. Right now, you don't have any water. So what you have to do is you have to be mishayr. You have to use your mind, and you have to think, let's say I continue traveling. If I continue traveling, am I going to come across water? Am I going to have access to water? I don't have access to water right now. But if I continue on the road, will I find some place that has water? If I'm going to have someplace that has water, I can't eat my salami sandwich now. I have to wait until I get water. But how long do you have to wait? So the Mechaber said, if you're going to have access to water, if you continue on your travels, you have to be able to find water within a distance of 4 mil. We said 4 mil is somewhere between 2.5 miles and 2 3/4 miles. But for our purposes, since we travel by car and we travel quickly, we'll see in the Beurrah halacha, it really means the time span of 72 minutes. If I could continue on my road and within 72 minutes I'll have access to water, then I'm mechuyev to wait. We're not going to be makel for you because we don't want you to eat with unwashed hands. We're afraid if you eat with unwashed hands, you might come to touch the food. We're not even going to be makel and say that you could eat with wrapped hands, because even with wrapped hands, we don't want you lechatchila to eat with unwashed hands. So if there's a reasonable expectation that within 72 minutes, if you continue on your travels, you'll have access to water, you have to wait. Okay, now let's say you don't think you're going to have access to water if you keep on going 72 minutes. Well, how about if you turn around and go back? Now, we're not going to be matriach you to turn around and go back as much as we'll be matriach you to wait when you're going forward towards your destination. Chazal realize if they ask you to turn around and go back, you're really going out of your way. So what the Mechaber says is, if there's a question of turning back and getting water, that's only within 1 mil. That's 18 minutes or a little bit less than 3/4 of a mile. That's the amount that will matriach you to go back. More than that, we won't be matriach you to go back. Okay, now, how about if you look at the map, you use your mind, and you don't see any reasonable expectation of getting water, not within 4 mil or 72 minutes ahead of you, and not within 1 mil or 18 minutes behind you. Then the halach is we give you a kula. What's the kula? You could wrap your hands, kairech yadav b'mapa. You could wrap both of your hands in a cloth, or nowadays, I guess a very practical version of this would be put your hands in plastic bags, or maybe if you have some plastic gloves, wrap your hands some way, and then we'll give you a kula, will allow you to eat with wrapped hands. Now, that's talking about somebody who's traveling. Let's say we're not talking about somebody who's traveling. Let's say somebody is home and the water has been shut off and he has no water in the refrigerator and he doesn't have any extra bottled water laying around. So he has no access to water or any other mashke that he could use for Netillas Yadayim. Or scenario that just popped into my head. It's May, and somebody's traveling up to the country to check out his bungalow colony, his summer home or his bungalow. And he gets there and he wants to go eat lunch, and the water's shut off. There's no water, and he didn't bring any water with him. He's not traveling. He's at his destination. What's the halacha then? So the Mishnah Berurah said, then we're matriach you to travel up to 1 mil. That's the same as if somebody's traveling and he has to turn back. The fellow who has to turn back on his travels is a big turkey. He's going out of his way. So we're only matriach him up to 1 mil. So too, somebody who's at his destination, any place that we tell him to go, we're being matriach him to go out of his way. He's not traveling anywhere. So we only tell him he has to travel 1 mil to get water. If there's no water within 1 mil, then also he could employ the kula of being koirich b'mapa, and he could eat with his hands wrapped. But again, the Mishnah Berurah told us he has to wrap both of his hands. Now, another chiddush that we saw in the Mishnah Berurah is that not only could you employ the kula of koirich b'mapa if you don't see any reasonable expectation of getting water, but you could also employ the kula of koirich b'mapa if you're mesupik. I don't know for sure that I'm not going to find water within 4 mil. I don't know for sure I'm not going to find water within 1 mil behind me. Or if I'm sitting in my house, I don't know for sure that I'm not going to find water within 1 mil, but I'm mesupik. There's a good chance that I'm not going to find water. In that case, the Mishnah Berurah said, again, you could employ the kula of koirich b'mapa. Now, before we go on to the Mishnah Berurah that we didn't see yet, I want to take a look at a couple of Beurrah halacha over here that I mentioned in speaking this through. I've incorporated the words of the Chavetz Chaim from the Beurrah halacha, but let's take a look at the Beurrah halacha inside. So let's take a look at Daf Tes Amid Beis. Beurrah halacha dibra maschil im ein mayim mitzuyim. Mishnah Berurah says, Ayin b'Mishnah Berurah mashakasavnu. Take a look at what I wrote in the Mishnah Berurah in Ois Cut and Gimel. Da'afilu imhu mesupik shem lo yimtza. Even if somebody only has a doubt, he's doubtful that he's going to be able to find water. So he has a serious doubt. He thinks, listen, I'm willing to go travel 1 mil away from home, but I don't know that I'm finding water within 1 mil. Gam kein shari. The Mishnah Berurah said you could use the kula of koirich b'mapa. But he says, V'ayin b'chai adam shekasav. Take a look at the Chai Adam who writes, Dafka imhu ra'ev harbe. This is only true if you're seriously hungry. This is not true if, it's lunchtime. Hey, it's time to eat lunch. No, it's only if you're ra'ev harbe. If you're very hungry, then you could employ the kula of koirich b'mapa in a case of suffix. Now, he tells us even a bigger chumrah. Ritva, in the Kedushei Ritva, of course, is a Rishon, and it's interesting, just from a historical perspective, the Chavetz Chaim writes there, Shenitfas ka'es. So the Chavetz Chaim is telling us that the Kedushei Ritva had just become available to him when he was writing that. It was just printed. Al Psachim B'daf Memvav, Mashma, from the Ritva it's Mashma, Da'afilu Bevadai Shalayim Tzamayim. Even in a case where a person is certain that he's not going to find water within these distances that we're mentioning here, Gam Kain Ein Lohakel Bistama, person should not just go ahead and be makel and use the kula of Koirich b'mapa, Rak Kishu Tzarech Lazer Harbe, only in a case where it's a great need, Kigon Shu Chalush, where a person is weak, Mipnei Torah Haderech, from traveling, V'kiyotze b'zeh. Now, the Beurrah halacha, I do not get the feeling that the Chavetz Chaim is being machriya lahalacha, that we have to be so stringent, right? Because in the Mishnah Berurah, he went out of his way to tell me that even in a makam suffix, you're allowed to go ahead and rely on the kula of being koirich b'mapa. He brings down over here the Chai Adam, who says that that's only if you're roiv harbe. Then after that, he mentions this ritva that has even a bigger chumrah, and says even b'makam vadai, don't be quick to employ the kula of koirich b'mapa unless you're mamish weak from hunger. But I do think that the Chavetz Chaim is trying to emphasize to us how much this is not lechatchila. We don't want to be mezalzel, chas v'chalila, in the Takanas Chazal of Netillas Yadayim l'chulin, of Netillas Yadayim before being kaveh suda al hapas. Now, the next Beurrah halacha here, Dibra maschil berichuk yoiser me arba milin. So I've been mentioning all along the Mechaber gives us these distances, right? So the Mechaber says, if you're traveling and you don't have water, so you have to think, if I continue on my journey, am I going to find water within the next 4 mil? Now, when the Chazal brought down the shear of 4 mil, how were people traveling? People were traveling by ox train, people were traveling by wagon, people were traveling maybe by horse, right? 4 mil, between 2.5 and 2 3/4 of a mile, that's quite a distance. And in terms of time, we're told that 4 mil is 72 minutes. Says the Beurrah halacha over here, mistabra, it makes sense, when somebody is traveling with a flying camel. What does that mean, a flying camel? Says the Chavetz Chaim, kigoin al post, the kiyotza bazeh. What's the post? The post is the stagecoach. The post is the mail. Now, we know from American history, the stagecoach was the guy flying on the horse. That was very fast. They made sure to be able to travel very, very quickly. Seems that in other countries as well, Chavetz Chaim was writing this in Radin, it seems that the post was renowned for traveling quickly. And that's the reference that the Chavetz Chaim uses over here for gamla parcha, a flying camel. Well, a car certainly qualifies as gamla parcha. You can't, if Chazal gave a distance of daled mil, right? So for them, daled mil was 72 minutes. For us, daled mil, if somebody's driving on Route 80 and he's going at 75 miles an hour, right? That's more than a mile a minute. So 2 3/4 of a mile, it's nothing. So therefore, says the Beurrah halacha, when mistarber the kishu daiseh begam lepercha ein choshvin lefi oirech haderech. We don't measure by the distance. Elo lefi cheshbon hazman. We have to cheshbon by the amount of time it takes. Arba milin la'adam beinani. It would take 4 mil for the average person. Shehushir shivim ushnayim minutin. That would be 72 minutes. 18 minutes to a mil. But then the Chavetz Chaim says, but again, this is only if you're very hungry. So that Chai Adam, he seems to be sticking with. Maybe he is being machriya, that we should only be employing this kula of karech b'mapa if you're seriously hungry. But the ikar point I wanted to bring from this Beurrah halacha is that when we employ these shiurim, we should not employ so much the share of the distance as much as we have to employ the question of time. So you're driving on Route 80 and you got hungry and you want to eat that salami sandwich and you have no water, you have to cheshbon, if I continue on my trip, within an hour and 12 minutes, am I going to hit water? If you say, yeah, I know that there's a truck stop, I know that there's a rest stop, and they have water over there in 45 minutes, then you got to wait. You got to wait until you have access to water. Okay. Now, let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah that we have left over here. The Mishnah Berurah that we stopped at Mishnah Berurah is cut Vav. That's Daf Samach Amud Aleph. It's the first, in my print, it's the first wide line in the Mishnah Berurah. So the Mechaber had told us that when we're discussing this shaila of what do you do if you don't have water, it's not only negeah for Netillas Yadayim ala pas, it's also negeah for the shaila of Netillas Yadayim for a davar shetibuloi b'mashke. We have to remember that we learned earlier in Siman Kuf Don Ches the concept that if you eat a food that you dip into a mashke, so you're dipping your Oreo cookies into milk, or you're dipping dip the apple in the honey. I think when we were learning this, I was saying it was I was saying it's in Yana Diyama. You dip the apple in the honey. Honey is considered one of the Zayin mashkim. So if you dip the apple in the honey, that's a davar shetibuloi b'mashke, and it's brought down that there's an Indian of Netillas Yadayim on a davar shetibuloi b'mashke. So says the Mechaber, when we're discussing this shaila of a need to wash and you don't have water, it's the get to a davar shetibuloi b'mashke as well. Says the Mishnah Berurah over here is cut Vav. We learned earlier in Siman Kuf Don Ches there's an Indian of Netillas Yadayim for davar shetibuloi b'mashke. V'ayin masha kasav dusham b'Mishnah Berurah. Chavetz Chaim says, take a look what I wrote over there in the Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Chaf where the Mishnah Berurah brings down the shittas that say that we're not noyig davar shetibule b'mashke b'zman hazeh, even though the Mishnah Berurah himself brings down shittas that were very, very machmir on the Netillas Yadayim for davar shetibule b'mashke. We're not noyig davar Netillas Yadayim al davar shetitule b'mashke. Kasav El Yerabah, the El Yerabah writes to b'makam she'ein loy mappa. Okay, now the Mishnah Berurah is upping the ante. What do you do if not only you don't have water to wash the Netillas Yadayim, but you don't have a mappa to wrap your hands either? We're saying if you don't have water, be karech b'mappa. What if you don't have a mappa, and you don't have gloves, and you don't have plastic bags? Vas tutman, what do you do then? Says the Mishnah Berurah, the El Yerabah writes, the mamakim she'ela mappa, if you don't have a mappa, mutar af b'loy mappa. Then, b'di'eved, you could eat with unwashed hands without a mappa. Kevin de en yachal asik mayim b'shir zeh. Since you don't have access to water within 4 mil ahead of you, or 1 mil behind you, or 1 mil all around if you're at home, so you have no way to get water, and you have no way to be karech b'mappa, then you could eat with unwashed hands. However, says the Chavetz Chaim, this is not something that would be very common. What? We're talking about somebody who wants to eat a salami sandwich and he's naked? He's not wearing anything? He has no sudar. A sudar is a turban or a head wrapping. He has nothing that he could employ to wrap his hands. You're wearing an undershirt, you're wearing a tal's cotton, and you're wearing a shirt. Take off your shirt. Take off your shirt and wrap your hands in the sleeves of the shirt. Right? L'chayra, there should be something that you have that you could take off and you could use to wrap your hands. And you're definitely mechuyev to do that before we're going to allow you to eat without mappa. Because the shitas ha'aruch, who's the one that says that when you don't have water, you need to be karech b'mappa, lav yichidahu. That's not a shita of a yechidah. He's not the only one who says that. Again, here we see historically, the Chavetz Chaim says, Baruch Hashem, we were just zeicha to the Rabbeinu Chananel on Masechtas Psachim. We take all these things for granted. So he says, the Rabbeinu Chananel, Psachim, Daf Mem Vav, Kasav Hedikain. The Rabbeinu Chananel also says you need to be karech b'mappa. So we're not giving up on being karech b'mappa easily. Okay. Finally, let's go to the top line of the Shulchan Aruch here at Samach Amud Aleph, the last phrase of Sif Aleph, the words of the Ramah. So the Eitzah of the Mechaber was, you don't have Mayim, you're going to be karech b'mappa. Now again, what's the goal over here? The goal over here is you have unwashed hands, stam yadayim are shniyos. We don't want you handling the food with stam yadayim. Really, Chazal want Netillas Yadayim, so your hands should be tar. You don't have water to do Netillas Yadayim, so okay. The eighth that Mechaber said was karech b'mappa. Now, says the Ramah, there's another possible eitzah. Eat with a spoon. Eat with utensils. If you eat with utensils, you're not going to come into contact with the food. Not everybody is happy with this. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Kat Zayin. Ayidekaf. Ha'achrayim niskashu bazeh. The Achrayim have a hard time with this Ramah. Where did the Ramah come up with this idea? That you could eat using utensils. Now, you want to tell me, well, isn't it a natural extension? If we're telling you that without Netillas Yadayim you could eat if you're karech b'mappa, why is that? Because you won't come into contact with the food. So if you eat utensils, you also won't come into contact with the food. Says the Mishnah Berurah, no. V'shani mappa, the case of karech b'mappa is very different. Shiyada mechusa, your hands are covered. Masha'enkin bazeh, masha'enkin in the case of using utensils, shiyada megula, your hands are exposed. Chayshin on tvei dil ma'asi laminga. There's a much greater possibility that your hands are going to come into contact with the food if you eat with bare hands using utensils than if you eat with covered hands, right? If you're eating with covered hands, you can't come into contact with the food without taking the covering off. If you eat with a fork, if something falls off the fork, you might pick it up. So the Achrayim don't see where the Ramah got this from. The The El Yerabah does have a teretz to this kasha, but says the Mishnah Berurah al kein nira. Therefore, it would seem if you have access to a mappa, yikrach b'mappa dafka, you should bedafka use the eitzah of the mechaber to be karech b'mappa, and you should not rely on this Ramah that says that you could use utensils. Okay, let's go weiter. Second line down, samach amud aleph sif beis. Interesting scenario. Hama'achil la'acherim. If somebody is feeding somebody else, so he's not eating a salami sandwich, he's feeding bread to somebody else. Hama'achil la'acherim, eino tzarich Netillas Yadayim. If you're not eating, if you're feeding pas, you're feeding bread to somebody else, you're not chayiv Netillas Yadayim, you're not eating. V'ha'oichel, but the one who's eating, tzarich Netillas Yadayim, he needs Netillas Yadayim even though he's not handling the food. Afapi she'acher noisel l'sach piv, even though somebody else is inserting the food into his mouth, ve'ein negeh b'meichel, and he isn't touching the food. V'hu adin, and the same thing applies, says the mechaber, la'oichel b'magrefa, somebody who eats with a fork. Pirish, the Ramah says, what's a magrefa? Kli, a keli, sheyesh lo shinayim, that has teeth. It has prongs. Pirik balaz, sounds a little bit like fork. Shetzarich Netillas Yadayim. You'll say, why do I need Netillas Yadayim? I'm not touching the food. I'm using a fork. Says the mechaber, no, you do need Netillas Yadayim. Says the Mishnah Berurah, eino tzarich Netillas Yadayim. If you're feeding somebody else, you don't need Netillas Yadayim. Afal pi shenegeh b'meichel. Even though you are touching the food, you're taking the bread and you're putting it into the other person's mouth. So you're coming into contact with the food. Your stam yadayim are shniyos l'tuma, and you're touching the food. Somebody else is eating it, not you. But you don't need Netillas Yadayim. Says the Mishnah, why? Remember, this is a takanas chachamim. I always say chachamim, the dinei derabanan make for the most difficult sugyas in Shas. Why? Because din daraisa is a davar kotzev. It's fixed. It's flat. There are rules, and the rules are definable, and they are immutable. There are definable, immutable rules to daraisas. Derabanans are gray. Derabanans have gray areas. On the one hand, you're going to tell me Chazal made a takanas chachamim of the Netillas Yadayim lepas mishum srach truma. Ultimately, it's because we don't want you coming into contact with food with stam yadayim, because we don't want kaihanim coming into contact with food with stam yadayim. So if Reuven is feeding Shimon, Reuven is coming into contact with the food, I could see as far why Reuven should need Netillas Yadayim, even though Reuven's not eating it. But no, that wasn't the takanas chachamim. The takanas chachamim was, when you sit down to be kaveh suda lapas and eat, you need to wash Netillas Yadayim. There was no takana made on when Reuven is feeding Shimon. On the other hand, said the mechaber, the one who's being fed, the one who's eating, he does need to wash the Netillas Yadayim, even though he's not coming into contact with the food. Says the Mishnah, test avapi. Why? Because once the Chazal made the takana on somebody who's being kaveh suda lapas and eating, and they say that he needs the Netillas Yadayim, they made a loy plug. They didn't differentiate between somebody who's touching the food and somebody who isn't. Bein negeh lein negeh. Same thing. The mechaber said, somebody who's eating with utensils, he's not touching the food, he still needs to wash the Netillas Yadayim. He's no better, he's no different than the one who's being fed. The same way one who's being fed needs the Netillas Yadayim even though he's not touching the food. So too, somebody who's eating with a utensil needs the Netillas Yadayim even though he's not touching the food. Now, let's finish off Siman Kuf Samach Gimel with the words of the Ramah. Says the Ramah, V'asar laha'achil l'mi shaloi natal yadav. You're not allowed to feed pas to somebody who you know did not wash the Netillas Yadayim. You have, let's say, an ill person. Well, I mean, When I say an ill person, I don't want to get into the shilas of he's ill and can he wash, can't he wash, etc., etc. Whatever it is somebody who, for whatever reason, you need to feed him. And you know he didn't wash the Netillas Yadayim. Says the Rama, you're not allowed to feed pas to somebody you didn't wash. Why? It's lifnei iver. By feeding him, you are being machshil him. You're causing him to eat pas without Netillas Yadayim. He's being over on a din derabanan. Less lifnei iver. You're not allowed to cause somebody to be over on an isser. Says the Mishnah, this is only true if you know for a fact that he did not wash. Avo b'safik. If there's at least a suffix that he might have washed, mutter, then it's mutter to feed him. Keinu lefi mashet tzidei hamagen Avram b'sim kuf samuk tes sif katan ches ayin sham sif katan hey. This is how the Magen Avram comes out in Siman kuf samuk tes. Ubiprat de la ani. Certainly, if you're feeding an ani, b'teres tzedakah, if you're giving tzedakah to an ani who really needs tzedakah, bevadai ein lahachmir b'safik, then you're being mekayim a mitzvah daraisa by feeding him, you're giving him tzedakah, then certainly you shouldn't be machmir on the suffix derabanan, because remember, this is only a derabanan over here. Holding Netillas Yadayim is only derabanan. Ayin shamasif base. Mekamakayim, toiv, it would be good to keshenaised la'ani shaloikim lebik lechel. If you're giving food to an ani to eat, and you're loikim lebik you're not certain that he washed the Netillas Yadayim, sheyoymar, you should say to him, kum netal yadecha, go wash. At least tell him, go wash. The reason you're not allowed to feed somebody who didn't wash is bisham lifnei iver. Tahainu belechem shal hamaychel. Berurah says an interesting thing. This whole concept that you're going to be over lifnei iver by giving pas to somebody to eat without Netillas Yadayim, that's only true if the pas is your pas. If you own the bread and you're feeding the bread to this person who didn't wash the Netillas Yadayim to eat, then you're being over lifnei iver. The belechem shel ha'oichel, if the bread belongs to the person who's eating, v'yuchal lakachas ba'atzmai, and really he could take it on his own, he doesn't need you, ain't kan lifnei iver. Then there's no lifnei iver. How's it lifnei iver? If he wants to eat, he'll eat. You know what I mean? If it's yours, so like this, he wouldn't eat. The only reason he's eating is because you're giving him your bread. So you're giving him your bread, he's going to go ahead and eat. But if it's his bread, if he wants to eat it, he'll get up and he'll eat it anyway. So then it's not your lifnei iver. Mikamakam, nevertheless, says the Mishnah Berurah, Kasvar Achrayim, the Achrayim right, to Aser Gam Bazeh, really that would still be Aser, Mishum the Aser L'Sayeya Lidei Oivra Avera. There's two different Isurim. There's an Issa Daraisa of Lifnei Iver L'Sitei Mircho. That's an Issa Daraisa. You're not allowed to directly cause somebody to be over an Issa Daraisa. That's Lifnei Iver. Being Misayeya Lidei Oivra Avera is I'm not causing him to be over the Isser. It's his bread. If he wants to eat, he'll eat by himself. But I am being Misayeya him. I am helping him. But that's an Isser D'Rabbanan. Okay, that completes Siman Kuf Samach Gimel. Let's move on to Kuf Samach Daled. Let's try to at least turn the page. Just want to mention, I forgot to mention in the beginning of the shir, that our learning should be a schus for Meir ben Chayesara, who needs Rachamei Shamayim, schus refuah shalema for him, and also, of course, all of our learning and all of our davening and all of our extra tehillim should be a schus for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael b'chamakim shehem, especially all the ones and all of our brothers and sisters that are living in Eretz Yisrael, whatever part of Eretz Yisrael they're in. Truth is that they're all b'makom sakana. They're all b'makom sakana, wherever they're living in Eretz Yisrael, because they're surrounded by people on all sides who have weaponry that could reach them wherever they are. So our learning, our Torah, our mitzvahs, our tefillas go out to them. It should be a schus. The Rabban should be megan on them, not the Iron Dome, and not this and not that. Ele berechev ve'ele basusim ve'anachnu b'shem Hashem Elokeinu nazkir. The Rebbeinu Shalom should watch over them, and especially the the captives and the soldiers on the ground, mamish b'makim sakana. The Rebbe Hashem should protect all of them. Siman Kuf Samach Daled. Din sheyachal lahasnais al hanetila ubay beis seifim. Here we're going to discuss a very fascinating halacha. We are very, very used to the concept that when we want to sit down and eat a Suda, or we want to sit down and eat our tuna fish sandwich, so the first step of the meal is that we get up and we wash the Netillas Yadayim al hapas. And at the end of the meal, we close out the meal with benching. And I'm virtually certain that by everybody, the way this works is very, very simple. I opened up the meal with the Netillas Yadayim al hapas. I closed the meal by benching. Once I benched, my meal is over. And my Netillas Yadayim al hapas is over. I want to go in 10 minutes and I want to eat another Suda. Avada, I'm going to wash the Netillas Yadayim al hapas again. And that's true. Now, the main reason that's true is because the assumption is that when you washed the Netillas Yadayim al hapas, you made your hands tahar. Once you made your hands tahar, you were careful not to be masiach das from your hands. You have a mindset, I washed the Netillas Yadayim, and now I'm going to keep my hands clean for the duration of the meal. Once you bench, we assume that you're masiach das from your hands, because you don't have a particular need to keep your hands clean anymore. But now the Mechaber is going to introduce to us another concept, and we can appreciate this concept if we put ourselves in the shoes of people who lived 100 years ago who didn't have running water. They didn't have sinks all over the house where they could just turn up a tap and go wash the Netillas Yadayim. In order to get water, they had to go to the well and they had to draw water. And in some locales, for sure, water was really a prized commodity. So, no, it's not so pashut. Wash for breakfast, wash for lunch, wash for supper, wash for an afternoon snack. Not so pashut. So therefore, the Mechaber introduces to us the following concept. We're all going to wash Netillas Yadayim shel Shachris, colloquially known as Negelwasser, right? So we all get up in the morning and we wash Netillas Yadayim. Now, the halachas of the Netillas Yadayim shel Shachris and the halachas of the Netillas Yadayim al hapas are not the same. There's, like the Mishnah Berurah is going to make sure to mention, there's very different requirements for Netillas Yadayim al hapas than Netillas Yadayim shel Shachris. But one thing we know for sure, you're going to wash Netillas Yadayim shel Shachris, right? Now, if you had in your mind, you know what? I want to have a scrambled egg sandwich for breakfast. And I'm planning on having a tuna fish sandwich for lunch. And now that I think about it, I'm planning on having a salami sandwich for supper. That's 3 times that I got to wash today. I need at least a revius of water each time. That's 3 reviusim that I need. Okay, you know what? I got to wash the Netillas Yadayim shel Shachris right now. Now, if I wash the Netillas Yadayim shel Shachris with all of the requirements of Netillas Yadayim al hapas, I could be mטהר my Yadayim right now. So what I'll do is, I got to wash the Netillas Yadayim shel Shachris anyway. So I'll make sure to use a kais shalem. I'll make sure to use an intact keli, which is a requirement for the Netillas Yadayim al hapas. I'll make sure that it's a kli machzik revius. I'll make sure that I'll use a revius. I'll make sure to use koyach gavra. I'll make sure that I pour it onto my hands with my koyach. I'll follow all of the strictures of Netillas Yadayim al hapas. Now, I'm not going to eat my scrambled egg sandwich right now. But so what? I'll wash the Netillas Yadayim shel Shachris with all of the strictures of the Netillas Yadayim al hapas, and then I won't be masiach das from my Yadayim. I'll have shmiras hayadayim. You know, especially nowadays, we all have to have shmiras einayim on our minds constantly. Otherwise, you go out into the gas, you go to the store, and the things that you're confronted with are terrible. So you have to have shmiras einayim on your mind all the time. So I'm going to have shmiras yadayim on my mind. I'll wash the Netillas Yadayim shel Shachris. I'll make it also Netillas Yadayim ala pas. I'm not going to make a bracha of al Netillas Yadayim because I'm not eating now. So I don't have a chiv of Netillas Yadayim now. So I can't make a bracha. I'm not going to make a bracha, but that's not ma'akiv. I'll wash Netillas Yadayim now. I'll be mטהר my hands. And I'll have in mind not to be b'siach das and to keep my hands tahor all day. And now when I come home from shul, I'll have my scrambled egg sandwich. And I'll bench. And then by lunch, I'll eat my tuna fish sandwich and I'll bench. And then by supper, I'll have my salami sandwich and I'll bench. Okay, to us, I think it sounds a little bit outlandish. But it's not outlandish at all. As a matter of fact, it works. And Meikar Adin, it works. Now, there's a caveat. The caveat is that in order for this to work, you need to make a Tanai Beferish. When you go ahead to wash Netillas Yadayim Shel Shachris, and mind you, it doesn't have to be Netillas Yadayim Shel Shachris. We'll see, it doesn't have to be Netillas Yadayim Shel Shachris. Maybe you went to the Beis HaKisei, and you had to wash your hands after the Beis HaKisei. So you took a keli, a kli machzik revius, you used koyach gavra, you used the revius, you washed with all the strictures of Netillas Yadayim ala pas. That would also work. But you have to make a tanai. You have to make a verbal statement that the washing that I'm doing now should serve for Netillas Yadayim ala pas, and I'm not going to be mesiach dat. Well, I'm getting very flowery on what exactly the tanai has to be, so I'm getting ahead of myself. But you have to make a tanai when you wash in order for this to work. Fascinating concept. Let's see what the Mechaber says. Says the Mechaber, Siman Kuf Samach Dal, Din Sheyachal Hasleis Al Netila, the halacha that you can make Netillas Yadayim with a tanai, and it could work for an extended period of time, even though you're not even washing before a Suda. Ubay Beis Seifim, and here we have two Seifim. Says the Mechaber, Sif Aleph. Noitel Adam Yadav Shachris, a person can wash his hands in the morning, Netillas Yadayim Shel Shachris, Umasna Aleim Kol Hayom, and he can make it tonight that Netillas Yadayim should double as Netillas Yadayim ala pas, and it should serve him for the entire day. Afilu Shaloi b'Shas Chak, and the Mechaber says it doesn't have to be particularly a Shas Chak. It doesn't have to be that the reason you're doing this is because you know later you're not going to have access to water. No, it doesn't have to be a real Shas Chak. You can do this. It works. But, says the Mechaber, Ubelvad, with the caveat, Shelo Yasiach Daita Behem. You have to make sure that you're not Mesiach Das from your hands. If you're Mesiach Das from Shmiras HaYadayim, then that Netillas Yadayim is gone. Then you need a new Netillas Yadayim. And the way the Mishnah Beurrah learns, now the Ramah, in the parentheses, is Mefarish. He explains what the Mechaber just said. He says, V'lo Yatanfein. What does it mean that you're not Mesiach Das? The Mishnah Beurrah would actually like to change the word V'loi to Sheloi. So it would be that the Mechaber says, what's Ubelvad, with the caveat, Shelo Yasiach Daita Mehem, that you won't be Mesiach Das from your hands, and says the Ramah, Shelo Yatanfein, that you won't make them dirty. What does dirty mean? Dirty doesn't mean dirt. Dirty means tumah. You won't touch a makam amachusa. You won't touch a part of your body that's normally covered. You won't touch a makam zeya. You won't go ahead and scratch your head or something of that type. Let's take a look here. Let's turn back to Samach Amud Aleph. Let's see the Mishnah Beurrah. Mishnah Beurrah is cutting off. B'fif. He has to make a verbal tonight. Ayal kol panim, or at least, says the Mishnah Beurrah, sheyechavein b'liboy, he has to have in mind in his heart, in his mind, sheyalaloi netilazu l'chol ha'achiloi shal yoichal b'chol hayom. He has to have in mind beferish, preferably verbally, that this netila should work and it should be efficacious for all of the meals that he wants to eat today. V'tzarech li zoyer, and then he has to be careful. Shetia ha-netila behechsher, it has to be a kosher netilas yadayim ala pas. Behechsher kol advarim ha-nitzrachim netilas yadayim la'achila. You need all the strictures and all the requirements of netilas yadayim ala pas. Kigon b'kli shalem, he has to make sure that he washes with an intact keli. Or b'koyach gavra, he needs koyach gavra. Uvemayim shaloi nishtanu mareyen, you have to use water that didn't change its appearance. V'shaloi naseh belacha, you need water that no tasks were accomplished with. V'chamavur b'simanim ha'koidmin. Everything that we learned in all the previous simanim over here in Hilchos Netillas Yadayim. After the Netillas Yadayim Shachris saying Kpeda, even though you don't have any of these strictures on Netillas Yadayim Shal Shachris, on Negelvasser, but if you wanted to double as Netillas Yadayim Al Pas, you have to incorporate all of those halachas. After Netillas Yadayim Shachris saying Kpeda kol kach b'chol elu advarim, kabavur b'simin dal sifim ayin through al through zayin. Zeh kevet shu la'achila, but now that you wanted to double as Netillas Yadayim Al Pas, shani, it's different. Ice cut base, the Mishnah Berurah says, the Mechaber said you could do this, afilu shalai b'shas atchak. But the Mishnah Berurah says, v'yesh ben ha-paiskim shekasvu, but there are paiskim like the Marshal, the Eliyah Rabbah, that write, de'ein lahakal bazekiyim b'shas atchak. You should only employ this, which is obviously a kula, you should only employ it b'shas atchak. Kigoyin, for example, shahilach b'derech, somebody who's traveling, v'yorei shalayim tzashamayim. He's afraid he's not going to have access to water. He doesn't want to have to worry about, am I going to get access to water in a mill or 4 mil, 1 mil? He doesn't want to deal with it. So before he hits Route 80, he'll wash in the morning until Yadam Shal Shachris. It should cover him for the whole day. V'chein kishayoshev ba'agala im ovdei gilulim, or if you're in a wagon or in a rideshare service with Eino Yehudim, v'ein mamtinim alav kishayered v'yechape sachamayim. And if you're going to get off the wagon and go searching for water, they're going to leave without you. Choshev shasat chak, that's considered a shasat chak. Af shehu yedei sheish mayim b'derech hahi. Even if he knows that there's water, it's still shasat chak because you might get stranded. Mahani kishenot al shachris umasna. And in these cases, it works if you wash the Netillas Yadayim in the morning and you make it tonight, then it should work for the whole day. V'ayin lekabei soisev katan daled masha kasavnu bazeh. Mr. Berurah says, take a look what I'm going to write at the end of a ois katan daled. Says the Mishnah Berurah, turning the page to Samach Beis, ois katan gimel. The Mechaber said, Balvad, there's a great caveat over here, and that is that you have to make sure you're not Mesiach Das from the Yadayim. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Shelo yasiach daitoi mishmiras yadav. You have to make sure that you don't forget about protecting your hands from sources of Tumas HaYadayim. Shelo yigu b'makam atinoifis. You should touch an unclean part of the body. V'zeu shekasav ha'Ramah v'lo yitanfem. And says the Mishnah Berurah, that's what the Ramah is saying when in the parentheses he writes v'lo yitanfem. He's not arguing on the Mechaber. He's explaining the Mechaber. V'hu pirish divrei ha-Mechaber. He's explaining the Mechaber. V'hai v'loi. When we have in the print over here, v'loi yitanfem, ritzainer loibar, what he really wants to say is sheloi yitanfem. You shouldn't be Mesiach Das from your hands, meaning you should have in mind that you don't make them tamei again. Va'afilu hachi, and even so, af sheyadav nekiyos, even though you're keeping your hands clean, hitzrichu gamkein lahasnois b'kodim, you still need a t'nai, sheya oiloloi hanetila la'achila. See, the Mishnah Berurah is bothered by something over here. What the Mishnah Berurah is bothered by is, he says, I don't understand. If lahalacha this could work, if you could wash the Netillas Yadayim Shal Shachris and it could cover you for the whole day, and the big caveat is that you have to make sure that you're not Mesiach Das from Shmiras HaYadayim, why do I need a Tanai? What's the purpose of the Tanai? Just tell me, you should just tell me, Noitel Adam Yodav Shachris, Afilu Shaloi B'Shas Atchak, Ubavad Shaloi Yasiach Daita B'hem. What's this about a Tanai? Why do you need a Tanai? So the Mishnah Berurah is going to give us two possible explanations of what the point of the Tanai is. The first one is, says the Mishnah Berurah, Va'afilu hachi, even if you're going to make sure not to be Mesiach Das, sheyadav nikiyos, so you're going to keep your hands clean, hitzrichu gamke lahastais b'kodim, you still need a Tanai. You know why? Sheya oilolai hadetila la'achila, so that this washing should be effective for Netillas Yadayim al pas. Why? Mishum de Netillas Yadayim boy kavana la'achila. Because we learned earlier in Siman Kuf Nun Tes that Netillas Yadayim L'Suda needs kavana. We said lechatchila you need kavana. Either the kavana, if let's say the washing is being done between two people, if Reuven is pouring the water on Shimon's hands, either Reuven needs to have kavana or Shimon needs to have kavana. But lechatchila for sure, there has to be some level of kavana that this netila is being done for Netillas Yadayim al pas. So if you're going to wash Netillas Yadayim shel Shachris, so it might be true that you have in mind to keep your hands clean all day, but did you have kavanah for Netillas Yadayim lapas? You're not eating now, so that's why you need a tanai. Since you're not going to eat now, you have to make sure that when you did that washing, you had in mind that it should double as Netillas Yadayim l'suda. Ula paiskim de l'netila loy by kavana. We did have paiskim that say that Netillas Yadayim l'suda does not need kavana. Kimavor b'sebekufto tes sifyud gimel. Yesh loymar. There's another reason why you need a tanai. Delaki tzarech tanai. You know why you need a tanai? The cave on the lachala yoimhu. Because since what you're trying to do over here is have a Netillas Yadayim that should be effective all day, ein soimchen al shmirasai, we're not willing to rely on this idea that you're going to have shmiras hayadayim on your mind all day, shema yishkach v'lavadaite, because you might forget about it. Eli im krin hisna, unless you made a tanai up front, the oz noised leiv lihizar yoiser. If you made a tanai up front, then we're willing to say that, okay, you'll protect your hands all day and you'll keep them clean. Let's try to push through the next Mishnah Beurrah as well. Mishnah Beurrah is cut in Dalet. V'lo yetanfeim, the Ramah explained that when the Ramah says you shouldn't be Mesiach Das, it means you shouldn't be Mesiach Das and you should be careful not to cause your hands to become dirty, meaning tameh. Again, of course, when we talk about tumah, we're not talking about touching a sheretz or touching a mace. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about tumah in the context of taharas hayodayim, meaning touching an uncovered part of the body, tinoifis, touching tsaya, etc., which is what the Mishnah is going to explain here. V'lo yitanfe means tinof hapoisel binetila. It means a type of dirt, tinof, that passels your hands and makes you and requires you to wash a new Netillas Yadayim. Hurak mitzaya, that would be if you touched excrement, Isaiah, or a particularly sweaty part of the body. Kolshu, even if it's a drop sweaty. Va'afilu rak naga b'makaymes ha'mechusa b'kufay, or you touched a part of the body that's normally covered. Ukilakame b'sif beis. Aval tinuf ofar v'tit ba'alma, but touching dust, touching a little dirt, Eino paisel hanetila. That doesn't ruin your Netillas Yadayim. That doesn't passel your Yadayim again. Kasra paiskin the paiskin right. Dem hichtis yada b'pata Yadayim miyad achar netila. Let's say you want to do this. You want to wash Netillas Yadayim shel Shachris, and you want it to be effective all day. So you know what you did? You washed Netillas Yadayim al Shachris with a tanai, and then you put on gloves, and you leave your gloves on all day. Im hichtis yada b'pata Yadayim miyad achar netila v'lo yotzian, mayil, that would work. Now you don't even have a chash of hesakadas. Even if you were Mesiach Das, so what? You wear gloves. Automatically your hands were protected from any kind of problematic tinuf. Nowadays we are noyeg not to employ this halacha. Says the Mishnah Beurrah, brings down from the Sheriknes Agdol El Yerabba. We don't do this nowadays. Why? We are not capable of Yadayim Askani Oisheim. Our hands are busy all day, they're touching all manner of things. We are not capable of keeping Shmiras Yadayim all day. Lakach, therefore, Manu Atanai Mikol V'Kol. Therefore, we do not employ this Tanai at all. Ve'etikam Gam Derech HaChaim also writes like this. Nevertheless, the Chavetz Chaim says it seems it depends how much of a pressing circumstance you have to happen to find yourself in. If you're marish in a shasatchak, that even nowadays you could employ the tanai. But you definitely need a tremendous amount of zihirus, of proactive caution, and zrizus, and you have to be a real zariz to pay attention. You act with alacrity to protect your hands with shmiras yadayim. V'lachein, and therefore yoniach yodav b'bat yadayim. You want to do this? Put on gloves. V'gam mikamakam yimisdayim loymayim, and even in that case, If at 2 o'clock in the afternoon you come across a source of water and you have the ability to wash Netillas Yadayim, Yitleim Pam Shnia, you should wash Netillas Yadayim without a bracha, Ukidl Kamei, like we're going to learn later, V'chein Kasav B'chai Adam, and so we write in the Chaye Adam. Okay, we're going to break over here. We'll continue next time from the top line on Samach Amid Beis, right by the Ois Cut and Hay for the Mishnah Beurrah. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The schos of limud HaTorah should be Megan and Gans Klal Yisrael. The Marshal should send Yeshua's refuahs, Parnassah Sheduchim to all those in need. We should be zeichet to see the Bias Kol Tzedek b'mehera v'yameinu. Amen. Be well.